Hey everyone, welcome back. Mark Thomas here. Let's talk a little bit about this thing called an ESG materiality assessment. As you know, I have a few courses out on my e-learning site for ESG, but this subject in particular has come up a lot with my clients in the last several months. Here's what the rundown looks like. First, we'll start with the description of ESG, then we'll move to materiality. We'll talk a little bit about this assessment grid that I put together for you, my tips and tricks, and of course, my questions and answers. If you think you're going to like this, stay tuned. Stick around for Module 1. We'll see you in a bit. And what does that actually mean? Like we said before, ESG, the E stands for environmental. Of course, the challenge we're running into is how our products, how our services, and our labor practices. Finally, we have the G and ESG. That is governance. That happens to be one of my favorite topics, as you guys know. That looks at our structures and our controls, the procedures, the policies that we have in place to govern our actions, things like board composition, structures. This landscape is huge. There are so many standards and so many frameworks out there that we're not sure which one to use. And I don't have the answer for you yet, but I want to tell you how packed this environment is right now. Of course, we have frameworks. What is a framework? That allows us to have a method. And then we have on the other side, we have standards. And standards are requirements that we might have. I'm not going to go over each one of these areas for you, but I wanted to point out the number of organizations and agencies. You back to a client discussion that I had not too long back. You've heard me say this before. I got pulled aside by one of the committee chairs, and she said, Mark, what is ESG and what does that have to do with us? This interesting concept because this organization is really thinking ahead. There is no one size fits all, just like everything we've talked about in every other one of my courses. These could be vastly different based on your industry, products and services. So you see an example here. A mining company would have a completely different materiality than, say, an international electronics manufacturer or a bicycle manufacturer. So that plays a big role for us right there. Now, why do you do a materiality assessment? Like we said, it's that blueprint for your organization, and it helps you build disclosures, whether you are legal and required to or not today. Your stakeholders or your shareholders may be asking for this. And now you can look at how you may prioritize, activate that overall plan. But let's get into the important stuff here and look at this materiality grid. I love this. In this materiality grid, you'll notice we have an X and Y. On the left-hand side, we see importance to stakeholders. That's the first thing is, remember, we're trying to look at all stakeholders who have an interest in our organization or who can influence my organization. Let's take a look at the bottom part of this grid, which talks about importance to business value. So what we're trying to do is find out the issues that are important to my stakeholders, but how important are these to my business? Now, what I want to do is break down some key factors for you to consider when building in this materiality grid. Number one, you'll look over here on the left, you'll see environmental concerns or environmental issues. What do we do with this information now? We take each one of those factors and then we start to place them in this grid based on the importance to stakeholders and the importance to business value. And how does that come together? Well, here's what's important. Now what we might be able to do is take this grid, but we see the criteria on the right-hand side, environmental, social, and governance. And what we're going to do is we're going to fill the information in there on the importance of stakeholders and business value, give it a 0 through 5 rating. Now, the data we have here obviously is sample data only, but look at how this visualizes the concerns and the issues around environmental and social topics that you can now take and prioritize your effort in your organization. Use this to understand what's important for ESG and your company. As always, a couple of tips, tricks, and closing for you. Number one, stay aware of the global trends, regulations, and compliance requirements in the ESG space. I gave you a slide a little bit earlier that gave you a whole bunch of different organizations that are looking at this from a framework and a standards perspective. Because in the long term, having good ESG practices can benefit any organization. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your kind attention. I know this was fast, but I hope you got some good information on how to do a materiality assessment, specifically what information should go in that grid. Hey, stick around, do some of the Q&A, and see what you picked up from the course. We'll see you on the next course here out on a Scout e-Learning. Thanks, everyone.